Hello and welcome to our video series where we're discussing current and historical events that inspired the writing of 2034, A Cautionary Tale. Today we'll be discussing the topic of disabilities. We'll be looking at the big question: who decides which lives are valuable? Well, before 2034 was even an idea in my mind, I had read this book. Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Martyr, Prophet, Spy by Eric Metaxas. I highly recommend this book. It's very compelling, and Metaxas is a skilled author. It's filled with intensity that forces you to think about the human condition. In the book, Eric Metaxas shares the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but he also shares the larger historical context of World War II. In the book, Metaxas brings up that Bonhoeffer visited a place called Bethel in Bissenthal, Germany. In this place, there was a community where the people cared for people with disabilities. Let's take a closer look at what Metaxas had to say. By the time of Bonhoeffer's visit, it was a whole town with schools, churches, farms, factories, shops, and houses for nurses. At the center were numerous hospital and care facilities, including orphanages. Bonhoeffer had never seen anything like it. So this happened in 1933. Unfortunately, many evil things were happening, even though World War II wouldn't start for another 6 years. Let's take a look at what Metaxas explained further. But even in 1933, the anti-gospel of Hitler was moving toward the legal murder of these people who, like the Jews, were categorized as unfit, as a drain on Germany. The terms increasingly used to describe these people with disabilities were useless eaters and life unworthy of life. So we see that in 1933, the Nazis were already starting their propaganda, increasingly getting people to believe that those with disabilities were unworthy of living. But what was it the Nazis really wanted to do to people who had disabilities? The reality was they were already planning to kill all of them, and that's exactly what they did just a few years later. Metaxas explains this further as well. But history tells us that Brandt was the principal architect and co-director of the T4 euthanasia program, in which scores of thousands of persons with mental and physical disabilities were removed from hospitals and places like Boldeshwing's Bethel community and murdered. We can see just from this that Nazi ideology was terrible. And people today know this. No one wants to associate with Nazi ideology. In fact, Jim Gaffigan even jokes about this. He talks about how children today could go around at Halloween dressed up like Satan, but nobody wants to dress up like Hitler.
We let our kids dress like murderers. Darth Vader, that genocidal lunatic. It's fun. The devil, it's cute. Hitler, no.
Everybody knows this is just off limits. We don't want to be associated at all with this horrifying period in history. But we don't often stop to think about how this happened. Somehow we think that because we know about World War II, that we're magically more intelligent than all of the people who existed at that time. There were a lot of people in Germany who also were against these horrible things that were happening, but they were slowly strung along, and power was slowly taken away until there was nothing that they could do about it. The plans for this horrible crime had already been in motion and had already been planned years earlier, but people had no idea. Metaxas also explains this. Preparations for the T4 euthanasia program had been underway for years. Now they hit the ground running. In August 1939, every doctor and midwife in the country was notified that they must register all children born with genetic effects, retroactive to 1936. In September, when the war began, the killing of these defectives began. In the next few years, 5,000 small children were killed. It wasn't until later that fall that attention was formally focused on the other incurables. So what does this mean? We can see that the government had been planning for years to murder their own citizens. They waited until the country was in a crisis to pull the trigger on their plan. Today, if anyone brings up anything like this, the idea that our government might be planning to murder our own citizens, they're called a conspiracy theorist. But really, we're having the wrong debate. We shouldn't be debating whether or not the government will do this or whether or not they're planning to do this. We should not have a government that can do this, and that's what we should be debating. Is the government able to do something like this? They should never be in a position where they can. The government should never have so much power that they could murder their own citizens. The reality is that when their plan started, they were coercing people into cooperating with them who had no idea what was going on. And again, Metaxas explains this in his book. Metaxas is quoting Victoria Barnett, who wrote in her book, For the Soul of the People. She states, "It is unlikely that the first institutions to receive the forms were aware of their purpose. For each patient, a form was to be filled out giving in detail the nature of the patient's illness, the length of time already spent in institutions, and the patient's racial status. The cover letter told institutions directors that filling out the forms was a necessary statistical measure and that a mass transfer of certain patients to other institutions might be necessary because of wartime demand for medical facilities." So we see again that the government's evil plans are under a cover. They're making it look like they're doing something else to obtain the information they need to carry out something evil. Do we have to wait until the government has the power to murder their own citizens? Shouldn't we be fighting to stop this before it even happens? We should stop the government before they even can have the power to murder their own citizens. So what would you do if the government asked you to register someone who had a disability? What people might they ask? Maybe teachers, doctors, social workers, parents? Does the government already have this information? Should they? These are questions that we should be asking. We shouldn't wait until something evil is already happening. We shouldn't wait until our power has already been taken away. And again, we should be asking the question, which lives are valuable? Or who decides which lives are valuable? Maybe the question will seem more culturally relevant if we ask, whose lives are essential? As always, thanks for joining us for this discussion about disabilities. Please share your thoughts with us and continue to join us as we discuss current and historical events that inspired the writing of 2034, A Cautionary Tale. Thank you.